Good morning, everyone.
Uh, am I audible? Hello. Good morning. Uh, a warm welcome to the first session of the last day of the MCP. Uh, Today we have the same expert that we have yesterday, Dr. Krishna Miyapuram from IIT Gandhinagar. He is associate professor in computer engineering. Yesterday, sir has discussed about computation approaches to the brain image, and now we are very excited for the second session that is on learning for detection of Alzheimer disease brain images. So, we request you, sir, to start your session and share your PPT.
Sir, your voice is very less audible, sir. Can you please speak a little bit closer?
Hello.
Sir, your voice is audible, but at the intensity is very low. Can you speak a little bit louder? Our speakers are full sound.
Audible now?
A little bit more, please, if you can.
Ma'am,
Thank you. Now this is okay.
okay, okay. So I request Dr. Krishna Miyapuram sir to start his session. Sir, over to you. Can start your session and you can share your PPT now.
Good morning, everyone. Shall we start?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Yes, sir.
My screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today's topic is on deep learning, and I will be covering some of the applications of deep learning for Alzheimer's disease. And given some very nice interaction yesterday, we will cover some additional and recent work from our lab related to the health domain. Okay. So what we are trying to say is, can I do brain reading? Okay. And if you see this paper, it's already like 10 years back, reconstructing visual experiences from brain activity evoked by natural movies. Okay. So the movies that are presented are shown here, and the reconstructed movie is something like this. So if you try to figure out any of the top 5 frames, then it doesn't come out to be very true, but it is possible to get a rough estimate of what the movie was being seen. So machine learning has a lot of limitations. We've progressed a little bit more compared to what it was a decade ago. And what I will cover, there were a lot of questions on structural MRIs and how we can use computational methods to analyze them and help the clinicians. So Alzheimer's disease is a memory disorder. It is a severe dementia. There is this hippocampus that is being damaged. And you know that unlike other cells of our body, neurons don't divide. So you have, if a neuron is dead, then it won't generate again in that region. And loss of neurons, atrophy or death of neurons in the hippocampus area leads to dementia, which is memory loss, and severe stages of dementia is Alzheimer's. Similarly, you have Parkinson's disease. What happens in Parkinson's disease? You have loss of dopaminergic neurons in this substantia nigra, which is part of your midbrain. So this is where your backbone is connecting to the brain, right? So the spinal cord connection, that is the midbrain. And there you have the very important neurons called the dopamine neurons, which are responsible for pleasure, for movement. Now, if there is a death of neurons which are responsible for that, then you have problems with tremors. So the person is shaking, trembling the hand involuntarily, right? So automatically body parts of the person is shaking. Or in Parkinson's, another major uh, 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 motor disability that is observed is freezing of gait. So gait refers to the walking pattern of a person, and what happens in Parkinson's disease is that the person is walking and suddenly stops walking, right? So that is the problem with Parkinson's. Similarly, Huntington's is also another disorder that happens by neuronal death in the basal ganglia region. Again, this is close to the ventricles. Ventricles are the gaps in the brain where we have cerebrospinal fluid that is like sort of cooling your brain system as well as absorbing the shocks and so on. And basal ganglia is situated right next to it, and therefore you see it in the form of expansion of the ventricles and the death in the basal ganglia, one of the nuclei like caudate, that is shown here. So MRI scans can definitely detect any such brain damage, but then the damage has already happened. So what we are talking about is we need to do early detection. So that the treatment can be started early, and the hope is that you can delay the onset of the disease, right? So there is an aging related decline, and there is also a dementia or Alzheimer's related decline. And what are the biomarkers for this is the aggregation of A beta or tau proteins. So the A beta amyloids have been long believed to be the primary source, and recently there has been research that indicates tau protein aggregation is also critical in Alzheimer's disease progression. So these can be imaged using PET. I was mentioning positron emission tomography because it can be selective to the specific neurotransmitters. You can find imaging agents related to that, or we can do brain structure using MRI. You can do behavioral investigation using cognitive impairment or assessment. And the reason why a number of computational researchers will be able to analyze the Alzheimer's disease is thanks to the data sharing initiative. This is worldwide data sharing initiative. Any researcher can sign the agreement form and get access to this data. This is in 3 phases so far. 2005, so now it's 16 years it has started, and there are a number of participants from the United States who have been scanned continuously as part of this initiative. A lot of data, including cognitive data, is available for diagnosing, as well as in India, we have very little. There are a number of researchers who do this research, but we don't have an aggregated data site anywhere. The I would be explaining 3 different approaches. The first one is known as voxel-based morphometry. This is very simple. This is exactly like how you would analyze a functional MRI image. You go voxel by voxel and you try to analyze it. So that is the voxel-based morphometry. And what you're trying to do is on the average, which are the brain areas that are uh, more damaged in the Alzheimer's patient compared to the healthy normal patients. and there are a number of tools and data is available via the Laboratory of Neuroimaging uh, portal of University of Southern California. What we've done is we've taken a very simplistic approach. The data is actually available for more than 150 patients, but we have taken only 20 patients in each category. There is a longitudinal data available. That means the data is there at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. So what we did is from that we took something that was common. We took 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. So all the data analysis, the different approaches I will be basing on just this, each one around 20 participants, male and female, distributed, educate number of years of education, their age, and the mini mental state examination or clinical dementia rating. These are the critical ones that are used to classify whether a person has Alzheimer's disease or not. So if you see the MMSE score, that is significantly lower for the Alzheimer's disease patient. Okay. So what we do for voxel-based morphometry is you segment the image into gray matter, white matter, cerebrospinal fluid, and you don't include the skull information because that information is also normally available in the MRI images. And you simply go for, so here are this gray matter, white matter, and the smooth gray matter image you can see here. So this is then subject to very standard, template and analysis. So in the analysis, what happens is you had three groups. What were the groups? There was normal group, mild cognitive impaired or MCI, and Alzheimer's. Now each group we had 3 time points: 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. So that is the way I am going to estimate the beta parameters. Now beta parameters are used as per the regression formula, right? So we have this group of people and then we are trying to compare and contrast the different groups of people across different times. So these are the different types of contrast. I'll give you an example here. So if I want to compare normal and Alzheimer's, so what I would do is I would give a weightage of for normal and a negative weightage for the Alzheimer's. So you try to find which brain areas are more in the normal compared to the Alzheimer's. And this is a glass projection. So the projection is on X, Y, Y, Z, and ZX. And that activity, again, nothing surprising. We get this hippocampus area, which you anyway know. The radiologist or the expert knows that the hippocampal damage is a sign of Alzheimer disease. So the highest activity is related to the Alzheimer disease activity. Now normal compared to MCI, also you get those regions. Now this is where interesting things start to come up, that which brain areas are similar between the mild cognitive impaired, Alzheimer's, and normal. So that you can say which are the patients with high risk who are going to get converted into the Alzheimer. So these are the people who need attention. We need to start treating them early on. All right. So there are different brain areas that we have highlighted, like the hippocampus and surrounding regions, fusiform, parahippocampal region. These are all surrounding regions. And there is some middle and inferior temporal, which is like sort of also different between the mild cognitive impaired and the Alzheimer. Perhaps this is a early marker. That is what we are expecting. Okay. Any questions on this, on the voxel based morphometry?
Yes, sir. I have a question. This is Utkarsh. Sir, this MNI coordinates are individually different for each patient, or is it a same coordinates? When we do the analysis for the specific analysis, the location of the areas will be different. Some has the larger nerve, some larger brain volume. In that case, XY it will be same or it will be different.
Very good question. Thank you. So this is, we are normalizing to a template, and in our case we are normalizing to what is known as the Dartel template. You can use the MNI template also. The coordinate system is the same, and this is for the group. So this MNI coordinates of the peak differences are for the group. It is not for the individual. Now that is useful for research purpose, but it is not useful for the clinician, right? And the next approach I am going to talk about is something that a clinician can use. This is known as individualized brain atlases. So in this, what happens is, we are saying that if I have an individual anatomy, I can find the normalization or transformation into the MNI space, right? So this is simply the affine transformation you find. Now, this is what we were analyzing at a group level for Alzheimer's versus normal or mild cognitive. So group level analysis. What we can do is, when you have the transformation matrix, you also have the inverse transformation matrix. All right. So in the template space, we have an atlas, the MNI atlas, the Montreal Neurological Institute atlas, right? So this is the standard atlas. So what we do is we take this atlas and apply the inverse transformation to get an atlas in the individual space. So now what happens? I don't have to rely on a group data. For every individual, I can actually get their actual volumes in this individual atlas. So the atlas is transformed using the inverse transformation of the normalization, and this approach is known as individualized brain atlases. Now, with that, in about 116 brain regions, you can get the data for each individual, and that, like this, for example, you can visualize between normal MC and AD which brain areas are showing differences and which brain areas are not showing differences. There will be some brain areas where there is no difference, and some brain areas there will be a large difference, right? Like again here, there is a much, so this is the standard deviation. And what you can do with that is, for example, here I have shown a simple pattern recognition of neuroimaging toolbox based approach. You can apply any machine learning approach on top of that. And in our pattern recognition approach, what we have obtained is this normal is different from the MCI and the AD group. I'm doing it at the group level, but I have the information at individual level now. All right, so that's the difference between the voxel-based morphometry and individualized atlases. And you see the huge overlap between the MCI and AD, and that obviously tells us that there is attention required in the MCI group. Also, the misclassification, if you see the true labels and predicted labels, you see that a majority of the time it is fine, but for MCI and normal, you have some sort of confusion. Okay. So the next approach we are doing is a deep learning approach. There is a reason why you want to do a deep learning. Traditional machine learning approaches, you have to identify the features. we have very high dimensionality of the data, and that is very problematic if you want to do any traditional machine learning approaches. And in deep learning also you have similar problem that the dimensionality of the data is very high. So here our data is 121 by 145 by 121. This is because we normalized to the Dartle template instead of the MNI template. You can use MNI template as well. And we've tried any the traditional architectures like VGG19. Training accuracy and validation accuracy not very high. So ResNet 50, ResNet 152, we get very good accuracy. Now, how did we get this? Before we applied this ResNet architecture, what we did is we took the individualized slices of the brain. Okay, instead of this is three-dimensional data, all right? So what we did is we considered the three-dimensional data as independent slices. What is the rationale behind it? So if you take any deep learning architecture like the ImageNet, okay, what happens if you say there is a picture of a dog, in that picture only its face may be visible, or only its tail may be visible, or only a different orientation of it may be visible. So what is the main advantage of deep learning in architectures like ImageNet? It's the huge amount of data, right? You have 1000 categories, no doubt, but you also have a lot of like 1 lakh plus or 10 lakh images, right? So you also have a lot of images. Now that if you want to get, what we have done is we have converted these 3D images into 2D slices and used each 2D slice as an independent training example. So the ResNet accuracy we get 80% above, all right? And decent training and testing uh, accuracy with very few epochs, right? Very nice. And here is the precision recall F1 scores for the ResNet 50 and ResNet 152. Now we wanted to improve further on that, and here is our architecture of the deep learning network. Much smaller and simpler compared to the ResNet. Very few layers, right? We have the 3D MRI input being converted into two-dimensional data. We apply 2D convolutions, max pooling, 2D convolutions, flattening, batch normalization, dense layer, regularization, batch normalization. Finally, you go through a softmax and you output the true level. This is much simpler architecture compared to the ResNet architectures. And we find an amazingly high accuracy of prediction. I mean, this is a very high. If you see the number of misclassified labels, it's very less. And the results are highly encouraging. We've also done the visualization. There is in deep learning now more and more people are recommending component activation maps, right? So these are known as CAM or GradCAM. So what we are doing is we are looking at the visualization because it has to be useful for the clinician to explain based on what features are you saying somebody has Alzheimer's or somebody has is only mild cognitive impaired or normal. Okay, so the explanation part we are still working on it, which features are important and so on. And we need to also see that how a simple model did better than more deep network like a ResNet. Okay. I'll pause there. Again, it's open for questions. Are there any questions?
No, sir. If anyone have question, you can ask. You can ask.
Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
For the deep
For the deep
learning
learning
model,
model,
we have to
we
give
have to
lot
give
of
lot of
images, right?
images, right?
Yes.
So how
So how
much
much
images
images
you have
you have
used?
used?
So you can see in the confusion matrix, we had around 3000 per category, and that was achieved by the 2D slices approach, right?
Okay,
Okay,
3000
3,000
images. So
images. So
even
even
with
with
3000
3,000
images, we were
images, we were
able to
able
get
to get
99.7
99.7
accuracy, sir.
accuracy.
Yes, yeah.
Did you do
Did
So
you do
data
data
augmentation?
augmentation?
yes, so you can do data augmentation, but not by rotation.
Correct.
Correct.
That's not recommended for MRI images. You can do flipping of left right. Okay, that is one
Yeah.
way you can do data augmentation. Other approaches could be more like you can play with the intensities of the images. But because these images are normalized images, it's not recommended to do any data augmentation like rotation ones, right? So you only flip left and right of the brain.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So, but
So,
then
but then
segmentation
segmentation
not given,
not
like
given,
it is
like it
going to
is
be
going to
given
be
as
given
such
as such
the image.
image.
Segmentation, when you're doing, you can segment gray matter, white matter, and so on, all right? But
Yes.
that is not going to help you in data augmentation.
No,
No,
not that
not that
my
my
question.
question.
Yeah.
For the
For the
2D
2D
network,
network,
the
the
convolutional
convolutional
neural
neural
network,
network,
Yeah.
you have
you
given
have given
the
the
pre-processed
pre-processed
image
image
and
Yes,
not
and
the
correct.
not the
segmented
segmented
image.
image.
We have not given the raw image. Yeah.
Uh, my
So
question is,
basically, whatever training data you give, the test data has to be in the same format, right?
correct.
Correct.
So if we use segmented images, then you have to give. No, okay. I understand. Are
Yes,
you talking about the 3D versus 2D slices?
yes.
Yes,
Typically in
typically in
any
any
image
image
processing,
processing,
biomedical image
biomedical image
processing, either
processing,
we
either
give the
we give
raw
the raw
image,
image,
pre-processed
pre-processed
image
image
directly,
directly,
or
Yes.
to
or
get
to
better
get better
accuracy, we
accuracy, we
also
also
do segmentation and
segmentation
then
and
give
then
it to the
give it to the
network
network
to get
to
better
get better.
accuracy.
Correct.
So
Correct.
are we using the typical raw image, or did we do any segmented in the pre-processed image?
We have
We
done
didn't.
both. We have done both.
Okay.
We have
So
done both.
segmentation means, did you do any other, what kind of segmentation? Did we do
Okay.
any
In
semantic
no, no,
segmentation?
no. In other machine learning algorithms, what they do is they use only hippocampus data.
Okay.
That is the traditional approach being applied for Alzheimer's disease MRI classification. So
Correct.
because we know that this is the one that is affected the most, and that is also the earlier sign for anybody getting Alzheimer. So what we do is we will not give the whole brain. That is why are we not giving the whole brain? Because of the high dimensionality of your features.
That's
So
right.
to reduce the dimensionality, right, the number of parameters that you have to learn also increases, right? That is also one of the critical aspects here. So to reduce that, you just say I will segment into brain areas now, not gray matter, white matter. I will give only hippocampus data and try to classify it. Or like I have shown the individualized brain atlases, I will find the average volume of each of the brain regions, 116 brain regions, and that I will sort of give it to my classifier, right? So rather than 1 lakh features, my feature dimension is now 116 only.
Okay.
Right? So you're reducing the feature dimensions by to improve the classification basically.
Okay. Yeah. That was my question.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, another question I have. Sir, I am also using this same database from the uh, sir, my question is for the image selections. Is there any criteria for taking decision on which kind of image we have to use? Because there are a lot of images there, like the variation in the images for the magnetic field which is been applied, like 1.5, there other is 3 Tesla. Uh, there are another variation is baseline images and the complete images also is there. So, sir, what is the difference between all those images and what should be the protocol? Is there any protocol or the same parameter we have to consider for the image selection?
So unless the protocol has been harmonized, that means the pre-processed data is made available. So for ADNI, that is not the case. So it's a multi-site data. So you are collecting this from different imaging centers across different cities of USA, and they are different types of scanners, Philips, Siemens, and so on, and sometimes different scanner strength like 1.5 Tesla, 3 Tesla. So what happens, your classifier will be trained better if you give uniform data, right? The same type of data, right? If you take low resolution and low and high magnetic field strength, the resolution of the image depends upon the magnetic field strength.
Yes.
3 Tesla image will be more better, but also have more artifacts.
Oh, yes.
So that nobody talks about. Everybody says, oh, 3 Tesla is better, but also it has more artifacts. So leave it aside, even then the 3 Tesla image is very different compared to a 1.5 Tesla image.
Fine.
So if you are trying to do a complete comprehensive thing, my suggestion is get more number of images, unlike what we have. Like we have taken only 20 images per category.
Yes.
So if you want to do better, get all the data that is available and sort of try to train on a larger data set. So it comes closer to the deep learning based approach. The reason we were doing this with lower number of images is we are trying to also solve a computational problem here. The computational problem is how do you, when you have less training examples and more dimensions of feature, how do you address that? So that is we are trying to develop this algorithms, and that's where it is different from the recommended approach. The recommended approach is you get all the data, more amount of data, which is the standard requirement for any deep learning. So get as much data is available and then try to train on that.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it.
Okay, I'm going to switch my gears and talk about some interesting and exciting work we have done. So this is the chest X-ray images. I hope the portal is live now. I can check and tell you the URL. Sometimes get the portal offline because of the power or UPS issues. So you can look at this our IITGN portal, and you can upload a chest X-ray to see what is the prediction for coronavirus. So the problem here, by the way, there is a good news as I speak, because not only we have the vaccine, but also the UK has released its data to all the hospitals of all the patients who were diagnosed with COVID. We had a huge problem of lack of the data in this case. X-rays are simpler because they are two-dimensional medical images, not more complicated. And our architecture, as you have seen, was also a 2D deep learning architecture. So what we did is we took this data which is available publicly, and also we had some validation of our model. This is again small data set, right? It's not a huge data set, and that is the main problem. As well as another problem with this COVID detection is you have to detect separate it from the pneumonia and other lung diseases. So that's a lot more complicated compared to just separating it from the normal versus COVID-19. We did histogram equalization. Region of interest was picked up. We didn't do much more than that. Again, as there was this question about segmentation, you can use the lung segmentation if available. For pneumonia data, those are available, and you can apply those lung segmentations. We didn't do this for the COVID. And our model, the same architecture that I have shown, we've got about 95% accuracy. And when you have the pneumonia or other diseases included, the accuracy comes down to 85%. Again, there are a lot of challenges here. What are the challenges? Let me explain. The first challenge, or what you would know if you have been following the deep learning literature, is what is known as recognition in the wild. In the wild means that you have to when you give a training and test data set, the data is coming from both the training and test are similar in nature, right? So they are coming from similar type of data. But so when you do this pneumonia training data sets, what you have is digital X-rays, right? From the UK, if you take the NHS data set, or if you take the Stanford data set from the US. So these are all, very good quality images. When you come to the X-rays that are collected in India, what happens is you get a film, and then possibly people are digitizing it using a mobile camera. So there may be a reflection of the flash. The film is not held in a, on a flat surface. You may be holding it in the hand or whatever. And there could be a lot of problems in identifying or validating this approach. So although you can claim very, very high accuracy, this is for the data set, not for recognition in the wild. And that's where you would say that this is a very preliminary sort of a thing. Again, we look at this component activation maps, and you do get that the features that it picks up are sort of related to the lung areas more. However, there are problems with that as well, because sometimes it may pick up features which are not at all relevant because of the deep learning. It's not looking at engineered features, but it's trying to pick up features on its own, and it could be wrong as well, right? So deep learning needs some sort of a validation, and that's where we stand as of today. Okay. So this is the work which we are done. We've done actually validation by taking asymptomatic chest X-rays as well from clinics here in Ahmedabad, and it's in collaboration with Dr. Deepak Saxena of Indian Institute of Public Health here in Ahmedabad. So any questions on that?
No, sir.
So if there are no more questions, I will go to the last part. Again, I guess this would be of interest to the audience. That is the EEG based classification. Okay. So here we are, this is not a medical application. But it's a different type of data, and I thought this would be of interest. This work was recently presented in the um, um, data science conference COTS COMAT. So here we have a similar.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Sir, can we find the EEG signal database for Alzheimer's?
EEG
In the
signals have been used recently for Alzheimer's. Especially there is a focus on what is known as the resting state data. The reason why anybody would go for EEG, also like our lab here in IIT Gandhinagar has EEG and not the fMRI, is its portability, right? So you can have a single room where you can have the EEG equipment installed, whereas if you want fMRI, you need a hospital sort of an environment. There is some data available, not a lot.
database in the net available in the net, sir?
On the net, you have to check if ADNI has added anything recently.
But the admin has
Last,
only images, no, sir?
correct. That has been the basic mandate. But I know the European ADNI, for example, has collected EEG data for Alzheimer's. So right now we have a Indo-Italian project where we are analyzing the MRI data using these computational approaches I have outlined. So whatever I have described, that same deep learning architecture, which was trained on ADNI, we have used it for classification of the European data as well. And our next step will be to get some data from the Indian population. So they have for sure the EEG data for the Alzheimer's. And I'm sure the ADNI 3, look for ADNI 3. ADNI 1 and 2 don't have for sure.
Okay.
ADNI 3 may have. That's why I said look at if the recent one has the EEG data.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the music is a very interesting stimulus. What we try to say is, everybody likes to listen to music, and there is this neural entrainment that happens when you listen to music. And what we are trying to do is, what are the such signals and how we can identify them, and can that pattern be uniquely identified? Is it depending upon the stimulus? Is it depending upon the individual? Because each one has a different experience altogether, right? So that is a critical thing, right? Somebody may like sad music more. Somebody may like a fast beat music, or a more something like which has a lot of drums and so on. So the pleasantness of the music is very individual, and we have collected EEG data here in our lab. I thought this would be of interest to the participants. So high density EEG, 128 channels. The data is 129 because one is reference. Okay. And 20 participants, what they do, they listen to 12 different musical stimuli. The sampling rate, you can go as high as 1000 hertz. That is every millisecond you have one data point. So 20 participants, 12 songs, and for each of them we have 129 by 27,500 data points. Very, very high dimensional data. And we want to identify these patterns. And if we could use deep learning for that, how do we handle this data size, right? So you have a lot of this time series data. So we create segments of 1 second long segments, sort of a thing, or 250 samples we have taken. When I have 250 hertz data, so that's why we have taken 250 samples. So that is equivalent to 1 second of a data. Each song was around 2 minutes. Okay, so you have lot many more. Now what happens? My data set size is increased, right? So I have 11,000 song images. We are calling them as song images, right? So they look something like this, right? It's just a data matrix, right? So for a machine learning algorithm or a deep learning algorithm, it doesn't matter. All it is looking for is uniform data. And this is what is being fed as input to the machine learning algorithm. So we have a deep learning. Again, a simple architecture, not too complicated. Um, Convolution, then max pooling, okay, flatten layers, and finally some softmax. And this is a 12-way classification, right? So I have to detect the song number. Okay, so the time domain data accuracy was not at all good. All right, we had around chance level accuracy. So if you see 8% is like, for 12 classes of songs, that is the accuracy that you can expect at chance level, right? And what we did, we converted that into frequency domain data. So the data is now not the time domain data. You simply do a FFT, the Fourier transformation, fast Fourier transformation, and get the FFT. Again, we do the same thing. We have these song images, give it to the same deep learning architecture. And what you see in the frequency domain, the accuracy suddenly jumps to 90%. Right? Test accuracy 84%. So, and this is that 2D inputs. I mean, the question comes, can I also do 3D inputs? We have less data, but your accuracy is quite less, right? So that model again is not working very well. So our approach of segmenting the data into 1 second long sequences gave a very good result. Another very interesting thing we did is the train test split. So normally, 30% of the data is set aside for testing and 70% is for training and validation. What we did is now we try to play with it. And this graph is something that is very, very exciting. So with only 5% of the data used for training and 95% for testing, I get 22% accuracy. If you see, this is much better than the chance level, which I was saying was around 8%, right? 12 songs. So the chance level is 8% and I get 22% with only 5% training data. That's very, very good. And if you go all the way to, even 70% of the data being test, right? That means only 30% of the data is being used for training. I still get around 70 to 80% of test accuracy. So that means that deep learning in frequency domain works like a magic. And that's very good. And you see that the different filters have small differences, not
Excuse me. Sorry, sir, I missed the some of the part. What output classes we are keeping for this?
The classifier we have done is the deep learning architecture I have shown here.
No, sir, output classes. And what they are?
Sorry, there is some construction noise happening here. Could you repeat what you said?
Sir, this what are these 12 classes of this
12
classifier?
different songs. 12 different songs that
We are
people have
trying to
listened.
classify the what songs we are asking them to listen.
Yeah, which they were listening at that time. And I am recording the brain EEG responses.
So, okay, thank you, sir. Sorry for interruption.
Okay. Right? 12 different songs are the class labels. So the deep learning architecture really works very, very well. But there is some very important information here. When I try to keep aside a set of participants, I don't get a great accuracy. It works when I have trained and tested on the same individual. If I try to train on some individuals and test on other set of individuals, this cross participant classification doesn't work very well. So this is in basically that each individual's experience is probably different, as well as it might be relevant for us to develop algorithms which can do cross-participant classification, which will be relevant in applications like brain-computer interfacing, especially in rehabilitation domain. All right. So if you want to do rehabilitation, you will not be able to train. Of course, that is the current paradigm for brain-computer interface. Every person you have to train on that. The classifier before you can use it. Now that problem has been there. It's the standard in brain-computer interface. And what people are trying to do is, can I have a cross-participant classification, right? So I don't have to train on each individual. So it might be relevant to develop algorithms on that. So that's all I have for the presentation. The floor is open for discussion.
Thank you, sir. So now there is it is a question answer session. So if anybody have anything, they can ask. Sir has completed.
Sir, I have we have taken the sum of sample which has been not considered for the training and testing, and we have checked the result on that.
You take the segment on which there has not been any training. Yeah, so
Yes.
what you're asking is, can I generalize it to a new song? And we know that from machine learning, the training and testing has to be on the same set of songs. What if you want to take a new song and develop it? Then what you need to do is you need to find a map of the features of the music. Okay, that can be done.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, can I ask question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, the EEG signal which you have explained, you have done in the time domain, and then later you have taken into the FFT domain, and in time domain you have done the one segment segmentation. I mean segmented, and then you fed it as a one data to the network. Now for the frequency domain, did you take the same one segment as the Fourier transform like FFT domain? Did you take and fed it as an image to the network?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Okay. But
What,
then
madam?
here,
Yes,
yes,
yes, please.
here
Yeah.
you have done 1000 hertz as the sampling rate. But typical EEG signal, it has a low frequency. This is to improve or increase the data or samples per second. You have done
So,
that, or
no, this is specifically done because of the music stimuli. So music
okay?
stimuli, the audio can go very high, right? The sampling rate
Yes.
can be minimum 8 kilohertz, right?
Correct.
And with EG, we can also do higher sampling.
Yeah.
This was the easiest or the sampling that we can do with 1000 hertz. We can go for even higher, like 5000 or 10,000 hertz sampling. Because the hypothesis here is that there is an entrainment or a resonance between the frequency that you are listening and the brain's response. So the normal EEG is a low frequency, the alpha, beta,
Yeah,
and
correct.
even gamma is like 100 hertz. That is the maximum people study. And when you transform like a 250 hertz sampling into the frequency domain, you get only up to 125 hertz, right? That is due to
Correct.
the Nyquist criteria.
Yes.
When you do at 1000 hertz, you will get up to 512, right? Half of that, right? The
Okay.
Nyquist criteria allows you up to the frequency domain estimation up to half of your sampling frequency. Now, what we are trying to see is known as frequency following response. In fact, when you are trying to study frequency following response, you do complete opposite. Normally, you apply a low pass filter, right? So
Yes.
that the gamma and higher frequencies are all rejected. In frequency following response studies, you reject the low frequencies and actually study the high frequencies. That's how it is done in this domain.
Okay.
And it has not been demonstrated for high frequencies how this frequency following response corresponds. So for low frequencies like 1 to 100 hertz, we know that there is EEG response that is corresponding. But for high frequencies, people have done like the brainstem. Brainstem is an auditory area that has frequency following responses. Other regions like the auditory cortex and all that have not been investigated extensively. So because of the music stimuli, we need to do high frequency sampling.
Okay.
It's not a desirable situation
Uh,
because the feature dimensions are increasing.
Correct. In that
And
case, typical music, CD music sampling rate is 44.4K. So can we increase still further than that? Obviously, it is going to increase the dimensionality
so
given
8
to the
to
data.
10,000 you can go. I mean 5 to 10,000 kilohertz. I mean 10,000 hertz you can go.
Okay,
5K to
but you
10.
have not tried that.
We are going to do that. Before that, we have some basic studies planned, which we will follow with that.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, you have for frequency domain approach, you have taken 250 samples in the time domain and convert it to FFT, and then this result is given to the deep learning algorithm. Is it so? For
Yes.
frequency based?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
ಇದು ಸೇಮ್ ಎರಡು ಬಂತು ನೋಡಿ ಇದು ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ ಇದು ಸೇಮ್ ಎರಡು ಬಂತು ಕಾಪಿ
And sir, where can we get the standard EEG database for different activities like listening music or doing something? Can we
So
get
the EEG
standard database?
databases that are typically publicly available are made for brain-computer interface tasks. So there are
Okay.
certain standard brain-computer interface tasks like mental imagery, because that is important for rehabilitation. So that is the data available in public domain, and that's why we have created our own data here.
ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ ಇದೇ ಎರಡು ಬಂದಿದೆ ಈಗ ಈ ತರ ಮಾಡಿ
We
ಈ
are
ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್
open
ಎರಡು
sourcing
ಕಡೆ
our
ಬೇಡ
data if anybody is
ಅಂದ್ರೆ
interested.
ಈ ತರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀರ ಅದೇ
We
ತರ
need to
ಬಂದಿದೆ
mute who is speaking.
Sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Your voice is not coming, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are open sourcing our data set. So if anybody is working in the EEG domain, you could contact us.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, how this sampling frequency itself can generate the different kind of the result? What you will comment in this?
We checked it. That was the reason we had two different sampling frequencies. And see, one thing is you could downsample and check. The other thing is you just have the original data at that frequency, right? So we have collected the data like that with two different sampling frequencies. Because typically people will go for EEG only like 250 hertz. That's decent enough, as I said. And that's why we collected also the higher frequency data. And we've checked it and both of them were good. It wasn't like you needed only high frequency or low frequency only. Both of them and the approaches were good enough. Because perhaps and we then took the sub part of that high frequency data also and verified it. So we've done a lot of experimentation before the publishing the work, and all of that has given. You can read our paper, Guess the Music, and it has all the details.
And sir, how we are giving available this music to them means they are wearing the headphone or what device we are utilizing?
We haven't used the headphones. Earphones are recommended if you want, and we have used speakers of the room. Very simple, straightforward, right? So it's being played on the same computer that they are in front of. So they also listen this having closed their eyes.
In
And
some other
sound is
session
surrounded
we
to
were
zero.
sir, in some other session we were listening about hearing aids. So sir, inform us the everyone having the different hearing threshold. So we have considered that parameter with respect to the subject.
No. So hearing threshold, that is a research that's also happening here. And that will be different for different individuals. It's our adjacent lab we have in IIT Gandhinagar here. And if you are interested in that research, that is comes under what is known as psychophysics. Okay, that's called
So
as
actually, my
psychophysics.
question is that whatever the auditory stimulus we are giving to the subject with respect to the song, so before giving that, first we should get his hearing threshold. Then only we can decide the volume, what volume we should give to the particular subject. And with respect to the frequency, also we can
That's what I'm
calculate
saying.
whether it is reaching to our subject or not.
That's what I am saying. When I am playing music, every one of you can listen. Right? When you are giving for a hearing aid, then that is dependent on the hearing threshold of that individual, and you have to customize it to that person. I am not talking about anybody who is wearing a hearing aid here. I am talking about normal individuals. If you play music on your mobile phone, everybody in your family or your workplace can listen to it. So this is much above the threshold. This is not a question about the threshold here. Our research question is more about how you can apply the deep learning methods and study the neural entrainment to that. So your research
Yes, yeah,
interest
I
is
got
on
sir your points. Yes,
your
sir.
research interest is on psychophysics, and you're welcome to contact my colleagues who work on that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Still, if anybody have question, you can ask. Or if there is no question, so we shall proceed to conclude the session. Okay, sir. So on behalf of Biomedical Engineering Department, I really thankful to you for sparing your time for the two sessions. I think it was tough to manage two sessions for you. You have managed it and you had time with us. So we are very thankful to you. My coordinator for this episode and our HOD is supposed to talk to you because of the urgent meeting with the principal, he is not able to interact with you. But later on, we will definitely in contact with you by mail. Again, as questions were very much impressive, some of us are willing to get to in contact with you by mail or any other context. So again, thankful. We are very thankful to you. Thank you very much for the both of you sessions. So we can end this session now.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.